In a few weeks' time, this building at the London School of Economics will be bustling with students. But if the experience of their peers from last year is anything to go by, they'll have to work harder than ever to secure a post at the end of their studies. The recession has taken its toll, and many companies are cutting back on their graduate intake. With more candidates competing for fewer jobs, employers can be even more picky than usual about who they take on. Take Joseph Fegali, who starts next week as a trainee at Clarksons, the London-based shipbroker. He already had a year's paid experience in equity derivatives at JP Morgan before taking a master's at Cass Business School.
Another of the candidates is in a similar situation, having been a trader for a little while. Another candidate speaks Japanese, the third speaks Mandarin, and then there's me, I speak Arabic on top of that. So it's quite tough, and I think it'll probably open up a little better over the coming time, but it hasn't been that much of a fun year looking for a job, and thankfully I've managed to secure one.
Another of the fortunate ones is Stefan Mrozinski, who has an LSE law degree and a master's from Cambridge. He's just started a traineeship he'd lined up 2 years in advance.
It's certainly a tough time at the moment. A number of my friends have found it considerably harder than they expected to get into corporate work or legal work, or for example accountancy work. And a number have decided to do PhDs or perhaps work for charities or do an internship with a view to actually securing employment in the corporate sector, perhaps in a year or so's time. So obviously it's a great relief to know that I managed to secure employment with a top law firm.
After the last downturn at the start of the decade, the number of graduate vacancies increased steadily. The cuts began in 2008, and they've been even heavier this year, down a further 13.5%. And those hoping for refuge outside the private sector will be disappointed.
Different sectors have been hit at different times, but unfortunately the end-of-year result for 2009 was that literally every sector bar one had seen a drop in vacancies. The only area that had gone up was the armed forces, who'd increased their officer recruitment very slightly compared with 2008. At the start of the recession, it was the banks and the financial institutions who cut their vacancies almost immediately. As time went on, then the manufacturers and the engineering companies joined in the cut as well. And now, as we're coming towards potentially the end of the recession, people are now looking to the public sector and worrying that it may well be their areas that will be cut next.
But although they might save money in the short term, companies can encounter long-term problems if they stop hiring fresh blood.
I think that's a big mistake. We haven't. You've got to continue to invest in the next generation, and the next generation has always got to be better than the last generation. That's how you improve.
Deloitte, the business advisory firm, is not cutting back on its intake either. Another 1,000 graduates will shortly begin on their training scheme.
It's very important to our business to maintain a healthy flow of graduate trainees through the firm. Also, we noticed in previous recessions when we've cut back on graduate recruits that's had a really serious effect on the business further down the line. So you have to remember that the graduates that we recruit today are going to be the newly qualified accountants in 3 years' time.
As a former trainee myself, I can hardly applaud companies that block their graduate recruitment schemes. For those that can afford to continue a steady drip feed of graduates into their organisations, there are clear advantages. Raw trainees are by definition inexperienced, but they bring fresh ideas and thinking to established institutions. And what better way to instil corporate values into future leaders than by bringing them in at the bottom of the organisation and training them from scratch? Besides, they're also cheap. I'm Andrew Hill from the Financial Times.